This week on Car Auctions Weekly, we get to look at which car prices are falling, which are going up, and we get to see a 1974 BMW Alpina more than double its price after the auction ended. Before we get into those trends and auctions, I want to thank you for joining me today. And if you would, please like this video and subscribe. Really helps the channel grow, and I'd appreciate it very much. Also, we have some cool things coming up, and I wouldn't want you to miss them. Here on Car Auctions Weekly, we cover the interesting, significant, and many times amusing auctions that happen on a weekly basis on Cars and Bids, as well as Bring a Trailer. We also cover some of the trends in the industry. This past week, we did a little bit of a special video, and we covered car and car auction terminology. And if you haven't seen that video, please take a look at it, and I'll link it below so that you can go look at that video and enjoy it. This week we're going to jump right into some trends that are happening in industry that I want everybody to be aware of, and then we'll get to the auctions right after that. This week for trends, we're going to talk about some declining prices and then two areas where it's been going up, and then we're going to talk about mileage a little bit specifically because it's a little niche market of this trend, and I want to cover that specifically. So I said that I was going to talk about declining prices in this first group, but I'm actually going to talk about declining and maintaining in the same group. And because this one example is really good, and that one example is a Toyota Supra. So I'm going to jump over and share this screen for you. And so on this is a pretty much standard Toyota Supra 3.0 Premium. So this MSRP'd for about $58,000. You can go to your dealer today and get this for MSRP, maybe even a little bit off of that. And so you can see how this only got bid up to $48,000, and it was struggling to get any higher. And the truth is you can go get a brand new one. Now this one only had 500 miles, but why buy a used car from somebody else when you can just go to a dealer and get a brand new one for a little bit more than what this is, plus the fee on top of it. And then shipping, of course, if you had to ship it to yourself. So this is a perfect example. So now I'm going to jump over to one other car. So this is a Supra as well. So this is a limited to 500 production examples of this A91 manual transmission car. And so these are limited production. These are maintaining their prices. This sold with 1,000 miles on it for pretty much MSRP, maybe even a little bit up of that if you include the fees. So this is an example within Supras where the easy to get segment is dropping and the harder to get is maintaining. And so this is a perfect example of what's happening in industry right now. So how does that translate to everything else? And so this is true pretty much everything if you look at Ford Raptor Rs. So Ford Raptor Rs are a perfect example of what's going on where the prices are still terribly high. So the second group of dropping prices are RVs, and I'm going to talk specifically about vans, but it's happening in the RV industry in general as well. And so I'm going to jump over to share this screen. And so this is an extreme example, but I always like extremes. Take something to the extreme and then you can usually show what's going on. And so this is a 2011 Sprinter. Without going into a ton of detail on it, I'm going to characterize this as a, sub-average build. It was fairly low quality in my opinion. That's just my opinion. I have built my own van before, fully built out on the inside along with electrical and everything. So I would call this a sub-average build on an older Sprinter. And you see the price that they bid it up to was around 21 grand, and I'd say that's about the value of the van. So there was no addition for the build out on the interior of this. And so this is an extreme example, but now I'm going to jump to a little bit less of an extreme example. This is a 2019 Sprinter 4x4. That was the first year of the VS30 chassis on the Mercedes Sprinter. It was a big change for Mercedes from a van perspective, and this 4x4 is what was the baseline for Winnebago Revel as well as Storytellers and all of these different 4x4 campers. And so this one had a very nice build out in it with bamboo shelving. Doug Demuro even did a profile of this on his channel on Cars and Bids, and so this worked out really well from a build perspective. But from a price perspective, you saw it only got bid up to 92,000 basically. And so 92 for this van, you could not build this van for that if you had to pay for labor as well. A person could do it, but the quality of this build was top notch, better than what I built, that's for sure. This only went to 92 grand. It did not sell. And it's usually telling of where the RV industry is going because they're leading indicators of what's happening in the industry. And so RVs always fall first. So what's going to happen with these RVs and vans, specifically on Bring a Trailer as well as on Cars and Bids? So what I think is going to happen is I think there's going to be more reserve not mets, just like these two vans that I showed you. And I think that the sellers are going to be a little bit ticked off when the auction sites are going to be asking them to lower their reserves. Eventually, everything will stabilize out and people are going to have to sell. So with that being said, are there areas where prices are going up? And the answer to that is absolutely. And so one of the things that I've noticed over the past few months is that prices for cars that have low mileage are starting to get more and more of a premium. And so always throughout history, cars that have very low mileage, whether it be 5 miles or 5,000 miles, and it's a 20-year-old car, you start talking about sub 10,000 mile cars. When you start talking about 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old cars, then that's obviously incredibly rare. People want that car that's completely original and has no mileage and is essentially the same as off the lot. So with that in mind, there are cars that are being sold that are low mileage and some that are slightly more miles, and the premium for those miles are disproportionate. So how's this working out in industry? And so I'm going to speak somewhat general here, but I'm going to use a few different examples. And so older Mercedes, like 99 2000, and then GT350s, and then some of the 2010 911s, all of these areas as well as many others are being impacted by small changes in mileage. So let's say that there's a car that has 30,000 miles versus a car that has 45,000 miles. The car that has 30,000 miles on it has significantly more value in market today than the 45,000 mile vehicle. Do I think that there's any value in that? No, I'd get the 45,000 mile vehicle every day of the week if I could save money, because a vehicle that has 15,000 more miles on it that's 20 years old, who cares? Not me. And but right now industry is valuing it greatly, and I saw an auction today where it was a prime example, and I saw it coming a mile away, and it was a buddy of mine who was looking at the car, and this car had 15,000 miles less than one that sold last week, and it went for $10,000 more, and it basically was the same car sans the mileage. So I think that's a disproportionate amount that is being assigned to mileage right now. But if you can get a low mileage car, or if you have a low mileage car, you can get top dollar. I'm going to show you in our first auction a prime example of that, and one that stung me because I was trying to bid on it. Another example of cars that are going up are these spring cars, is what I'll call it, or summer cars. A lot of parts of the country have seen their first hint of spring. They had some nice weather, so people are out there shopping, looking for their convertibles or their sports cars or fun cars for the summer. Those are getting top dollar, considerably more than what they got back in November, December. And so that little segment has went up in the last 2 months. So now let's get right into the auctions. And the first one is one that I hinted at just a minute ago. So the first car that we're going to look at is this 99 CLK430. So this was a car that I actually was interested in buying and had my finger hovering over the buy button. This was a Lorenzer factory optioned model, and so it only had 28,000 miles on it. Obviously incredibly rare, incredibly low mileage, but these cars don't get top dollar. I was willing to go up to 21 grand. I never even got to put a bid in. And so I had my finger over the button. They kept bidding it up. And as soon as it got up to 21, I was like, all right, that's it. I'm out. So this sold for $24,000. That price represents the highest price that a CLK 430 has went for in the last 4 years as far as I could find. So kudos to the seller and to the buyer. And to be honest, I mean, if you wanted one of these, this was the one to get. This is a perfect example of that low mileage. So everybody's putting a higher dollar on low mileage cars right now. And so it's just something that's really been interesting to watch. And it's something to keep in note. You can get deals on cars that have a little bit more mileage on them now. So that's a big benefit. There's some opportunities out there because of it. Now, I will mention a little comedy here on this one. So I'm going to scroll down into the comments. And I've noticed this pretty much everywhere. And so this is happening across every auction platform that I've seen. And if we jump down to the comments on this, you'll see what I'm talking about. And in nearly every auction, you will find somebody who jumps in. And this was a bidder, so he's completely within his rights. He thinks it's a hell of a deal. So it was a record-breaking sale, but he thinks it's a hell of a deal. And I think it's a fantastic car, and I don't know about a deal, but it was a fantastic car. But in pretty much every auction, the first person in after the end of the auction is going to say that this was an incredible deal. It doesn't matter whether they broke records or not, but there's going to be some guy that's going to be in there saying it's a hell of a deal. All right, so moving on to the next auction that I wanted to profile, and this was in some of my YouTube shorts on a day-to-day basis. And so this was Doug Demuro's RS2 Avant. So most people know Doug Demuro and know about his YouTube channel and his patented quirks and features at this point. And so this was his personal RS2. And so this sold for $92,000. From an auction perspective, it was pretty much non-eventful. What happened is, I believe it was a day ahead of the auction, or maybe even more than that, a person came in and bid $92,000. And then when the time started expiring, there was no bids. This auction just ended. And so it was kind of anticlimactic, especially for how much attention and how much publicity it got. But that price, and you'll see on this chart, that price is reflective of what's happening with these RS2s. Although it's such a small sample size, there hasn't been a lot of sales in the US, but they are going up. And I would say this is probably around where it was. I believe Doug actually mentioned what he paid for the car, and it was in the 80s. Maybe low 80s is what he paid for it several years ago. And so he had done some upgrades on it with the interior, and you can see he put some different Alcantara on it, and he did a few other things to it. It did have a small coolant leak, which he talked about in there, and he had repaired it mostly, but it was still leaking a little bit. And so, but that's true. These cars are going to have issues and problems, and so this one goes on to the new buyer for $92,000. Next up, we have a 2000 BMW 323i Touring, but not really. So this was a junk titled car, and I believe that the buyer went to a junkyard, salvage yard, and purchased this car. And then he clearly was very knowledgeable with the E46 platform and went about doing all of the proper upgrades. And I'll just kind of scan through this, but he put an M54 engine in it, which is from an early 2000 330 CI. He upgraded everything from the Vanos as well as the suspension. He put a different exhaust on it from the rare 330i ZHP. And then he went through the car completely from a suspension as well as a subframe perspective, and did all the things that you would say that somebody should do before they tracked one of these or drove it hard, or it should just be that way from the factory. And so he had the nice M-Tech 1 bumpers on it, and it was a beautiful car. And he had it titled as salvage in California, and it sold for $14,000. And so I think that was a fair price. Next up is my favorite topic. So a C8 Corvette. And so I say that in jest. So I've been talking about ADMs a lot, and it's a really cool looking car, and the seller was incredibly cool as well. So he was asked why he was selling it so quickly, and essentially his family's going to travel abroad, and he wanted it to move on to somebody who would use it and enjoy it. And he did not want to sell it back to a dealer, and he didn't care if he took a loss. He just wanted somebody to enjoy the car and for it to get passed on to a fellow enthusiast. And so I really thought that was cool, and it sold for $13,000 under MSRP. All right, that's it for the Cars and Bids auction. Now we're going to go into Bring a Trailer. Before that, if you are enjoying this, please like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I appreciate it. All right, straight into Bring a Trailer now. So the first one we're going to do right out of the gate is this R32 2004 VW. And so this R32, these cars are phenomenal. And this, I believe this was the 4th gen of the R32. And so these are a little bit more rare, have some special components on it. And so this car did extremely well, got bid up to a grand total of $104,000. So now it only has 97 miles on it, which is like less than a third of a tank. But you can see how active this auction was as well. 529 comments. I haven't seen that many in a long time. This was a car that I was somewhat familiar with, but I had no idea that it would have went for this. All right, here it is, the 1988 Lancia Delta Integrale. So this car is phenomenal. I really enjoyed watching this auction, and it's so striking. It's got the Martini livery on it. It looks fantastic with the lights, and I'm not a big fan of 4-door hatches, but this car won me over completely. It's got the Speedline wheels, Recaro seats. It even came with its own Hot Wheels model. It was a tremendous car and a tremendous sale. If you take a look at some of the pictures on this thing, including the interior with the Recaro seats, I just think it absolutely looked phenomenal. These don't get the crazy money like the Delta Integrale Evos and the Renault R5s and things of that nature, but this car was a cool car, and I think from a normal guy perspective, myself being a normal guy, I really enjoyed it, and I wouldn't mind having one like this. All right, moving into a little bit more of crazy territory. We're going to hop right into this 192.5 Evo. And so this car is just awesome with the wheel arches, wheel flares, and there's a lot of rarity in this car, and they look incredible. 502 of them were made or something along those lines. And this car has the Cosworth engine in it. Well known, documented. This isn't a Hammer or anything, but this car is super cool, and they were really affordable for a short period of time. And over the last 5-10 years, they've kind of just kept ascending. And so they're on that curve where they're going up. And I think that it's a really cool car, and they're going to keep going up with time. If we take a look at some of the pricing that's happened with these, all these outliers that are up here are of that nature. And so this car going for 100 is an example. And if we look at some of these other ones, Evo 2s and so on and so forth. And so that's where the crazy money is on these. So since we're talking about crazy money, we might as well just go completely absurd and take a look at this 2019 Ford GT. So this is one of the Carbon series. I'm not sure if you were following Barrett-Jackson just recently. They just had an auction where they had 2 of these things for sale. They both went for, I believe, about $1 million, just over $1 million. And with fees, because they charge like 10% buyer and 10% seller fees, that's basically 1.2. And so you see the auction on this went for 1.2. And so it seems like they've settled into that 1.2 range for these cars. That's not too bad of an investment from a Carbon series perspective. If we scroll down, I believe the MSRP on this was $615,000. Man, these things are beautiful though. Just look at that. So this car went for $615,000, and that was with $120,000 of optional equipment. So this car was $615,000 a few years ago when the person bought it, and now they sold it for 1.2, and so that's a whole lot better than I do in the stock market. I'm not sure that I could keep this car and not drive it. What about you? Could you have this car and not drive it for 4 years basically? All right, so now I've saved the best for last, at least best in my opinion. In this case, it's this 1974 BMW 2002 Alpina. When I saw this, it caught my eye and it was interesting, and so I started looking into it, and there was a whole lot of chatter, and you'll notice there's 440 comments on this auction, and there was a lot of people kind of down talking about the car, and they were criticizing perhaps some of the restoration that happened on it, although I think they call it refurbishment on here. But there's been some higher priced Alpinas out there, and this one isn't out of line at all, but this auction reached about $62,000 and it stopped. And the dissenters of the auction were basically claiming victory at that point. And as soon as the clock started expiring, all of a sudden all these bids started coming in. And so there were several people. It ended up only being 2 people, but within a little bit more than 30 minutes, this auction went from below $70,000 to $170,000. And from an extended perspective, it went well over a half hour past when it was set to expire. And so that's 2 minutes at a clip, 2 minutes every bid, 2 minutes every bid. It just kept getting extended. And the comments were coming in so fast, you couldn't even keep up with them. And so it just reached this fevered pitch. And then finally somebody put in a bid for 170, and that was that, and it sold. It was really entertaining to watch it and see this unfold and see that price go from 70 to 170 like that. All right, that is it for the auctions. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate the support. If you enjoyed the video, please like below and comment on the video and tell me of things that I didn't cover or things that you're hoping that I do cover in the following week. We're going to have YouTube Shorts probably a couple times a week going forward. I was doing them daily, but that's probably a little bit too much. So I'm going to do them as special auctions come up or really interesting opportunities. And I'll put that out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as YouTube Shorts. So until next week, enjoy those auctions, and I'll see you out there.